Hey everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson, the Last Nighters, and the Last Nighters are part of the Launchpad Media, where we're always launching new ideas in your direction. Check it out at thelaunchpadmedia.com. Tonight, we are continuing our series with Liberty Weekly, where we talk about Star Trek: The Next Generation. Earlier in June, I think we did Season 1, Episode 7 on Justice with Pat from Liberty Weekly, and that one was a lot of fun, so we brought him back tonight for this episode, where we're going to be talking about Season 2, Episode 9, The Measure of a Man. And this is episode 79 of the show, so lastnighters.com/79 for the show notes and more. And if you like what we do here, do please give us some reviews on the old iTunes/Apple Podcasts. That brings up our rankings and ratings and gives us more eyeballs, more recommendations to people. So, Pat, welcome back to the show. Remind our audience who you are real quickly and where they can find you, and then we will kick this bad boy off.
Hey, buddy, glad to be back on here. I'm Patrick McFarlane of the Liberty Weekly podcast. I'm a practicing personal injury and civil rights attorney. Most recently, we had a couple episodes. Keith Knight is my co-host, and we debunked Ayn Rand's objections to anarchism. That was a real fun episode. And also, we aired Keith's interview with Gene Epstein of the Soho Forum. And so those were some really good content that we put out there. But glad to be back. Since we did the episode for Star Trek this last time, I've since become a fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which I wasn't beforehand. So now I'm a little bit more eminently qualified to cover this material. But I'm glad to be digging into this episode, Season 2, Episode 9, The Measure of a Man. So let's get into it.
All right, yeah, we're going to venture back into the neutral zone and boldly go where no man has gone before to discuss another episode of Star Trek. So just a reminder, this is our continuing mission to cover a few key episodes of this thought-provoking series for the summer. And after this one, we're going to do one more at least in August, which will actually be a continuation of this one, as you will come to see what we talk about here. So this is available on the old Netflix, and it is Star Trek: The Next Generation, Season 2, Episode 9, The Measure of a Man. It is described as thus: when Data refuses to be disassembled for research purposes, Picard is enlisted to defend his rights in court. So that's all we've got to go on from a description. But then we've got a copious amount of notes. And might I add, and Robert, you can back me up on this, I had the foolish notion that we would not only have discussed this episode, but also the Justice episode at one time, and maybe even potentially the third episode that we're going to be talking about. So that was really, really dumb of me, because this one I think is going to be chock full of content.
Yeah, you real stupid. Because my man, Patty McFarlane, he knows a thing or two about legal procedure. He knows what court systems are in Washington, D.C., and he will tell you all about it, regardless of the relevance or not.
It's super relevant. Come on, guys.
Objection.
Sustained.
This one, we got this dude who's coming up on the Enterprise, and he's like, Data, man, you're a talking toaster, and we're going to take you apart, and we're going to make more talking toasters, and it's going to be sweet because there's going to be all these talking toasters. And Data's like, what? And Picard's like, nah. And Wrecker's like, And then they talk about it, and they have a little powwow. And how does it go? That's about how it goes. There's a lady who turns into the court lady. She's like the judge. What is her official standing in Starfleet? I forget.
She's a JAG, a Judge Advocate General. And her name is Philippa Lavoie. And she has a history with Picard. She tried him in a court-martial for the Stargazer incident, which I am not nerdly enough to know exactly what that is.
I know what the Stargazer incident is.
Fucking nerd alert.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, it was since there was an episode, I think in Season 1 or Season 2, where basically Picard opened fire on a vessel that I think hadn't opened fire on him first. And so he did a special Stargazer maneuver, and then when it was just appearing from hyperspace, he blasted on it. Or he did a special maneuver and then got out of hyperspace and then initiated fire first on it, or something like that.
So there was a question about who was the aggressor in that event.
Yes. And they revisited
like a very libertarian argument.
Yeah, maybe we could do that one, but it happened before the Next Generation series came into being. So, but there's an episode that references it where they find the logs from the ship that Picard himself was on, and I think it's the Klingons who are trying to try him for that, or it's some of the people with the huge brows or the huge heads or something. But that'd be a good one to do.
That doesn't narrow it down. That's every Star Trek race.
The ones that are dirty capitalists that only
Romulans or the Ferengis.
Ferengis
with the big ears.
Yeah, those
and the forehead brows, and they want to make money.
I said the forehead brow.
Yeah, you were close. Okay.
Yeah.
They got the little teeth.
Forehead brow Ferengi sounds almost
Ferengi. Yeah.
Yeah, close enough.
It's a good episode. Yeah.
Well, before we really get into this one, I like to go linear because I'm taking notes as I'm watching. So I'm going to direct this to you, Robert. The opening poker scene sort of sets the tone. And I know that you are a bit of a poker player / fan. So why don't you walk us through what is on display here? What's happening? And why is it relevant to the rest of the story?
Man, you put me on the spot here. I didn't know this question was going to be asked of me. I'm not like a witness on the stand.
Well, you could play Lady Gaga's poker face because you're born this way.
So this is 1991 or something like that. So they're playing 5-card stud, which would be, I guess, the game people recognize as poker at the time. But nowadays, you'd be playing Texas Hold'em.
Right, but this is before like poker became popular, like super popular in like the mid 2000s, right?
Well, yeah, the 2001, I believe, was the first year they televised it because they had the hole cards and Chris Moneymaker won. And then poker exploded because it was actually interesting to watch. You got a guy, you see his cards, and you see what kind of decisions they make. Well, in this episode, Data's playing with a bunch of his buddies, and what happens is he gets bluffed. Even though he has an amazing hand, he gets bluffed off his hand by Riker, and because he doesn't understand the idea that someone would be bluffing with nothing, essentially kind of lying, sort of a fraud type situation, and he doesn't quite understand the nuance and the reason why someone would want to do that, which is a little simplistic, but whatever. Now, how would you say that applies to the episode, Dan? Because he's trying to learn about humanity, right? So he's not quite a human yet, but he is a sort of life form, I would say. Well, that's what the whole episode's about.
I think it sets the table that he's not quite human, and he lacks that instinct, because that's what they say is, you're not playing the cards, you're playing the man across from you, right? So the reason that Riker played with nothing and bluffed Data was because instinctually he knew that Data would likely fold with, calculating that, well, if Riker's going to stay in, then he must have like the King of Hearts, because that's the only card that would have beat what Data had, because he had a Queen of Hearts and it would have been a flush to the Queen, right? So Riker could have had, well, I guess the Ace or the King. And Data must have assumed, due to all the probabilistic calculations that he can perform, 21 trillion cycles a second or whatever he can do, that must be the reason why Riker is still in the game. So
right, if he was acting rationally.
Right. Now, he said that he's taken in all of the information from all of the books and all the resources available throughout history that is in the records. But I got to think that can't be quite accurate, because the whole concept of bluffing would have been prominently discussed and theorized about in those texts. But
before he even sat down at the table, he would have to understand that bluffing is a big part of the game. He would have to know mathematically that you're only able to get premium cards 20% of the time, 15% of the time. And in order to win the whole game, you can't rely on that kind of a percentage. You have to win 30% of the time, 40% of the time in order to win. So he would have to know that. So I think it's a bit of a flaw in the writing, but I get what they're trying to say. The important part is that you're coming out of it with Data is still studying humanity, and he's not quite there yet.
Right. And I think it sets up the audience to find Maddox and Riker's arguments in the opening of the little trial very, very convincing. And I found them convincing. I did. Even in this second watching I did today.
Oh, really, sir? Are you going to argue for the Data's a toaster argument?
Well, that was the original finding.
Yeah. He's Starfleet property. They can take him apart if they want to.
Well, I think that this the whole poker scene is basically Data failing the Turing test, right? And this is something I thought we'd probably stumble upon at some point. Is the Turing test, for those of you who don't know, is a test of a machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. So if a human evaluator would judge natural language conversations between a human and a machine designed to generate human-like responses, I'm reading from Wikipedia here, the evaluator would be aware that one of the two partners in the conversation is a machine. So basically from that interaction, Riker knows that Data's a machine before he goes into, but because Data doesn't understand why someone would bluff, he fails the Turing test.
Yeah,
but of course, that's not necessarily Maddox's argument, though. He's not arguing whether or not Data is a machine and everybody else is a human. He's arguing that Data is not sentient, which is a different standard.
Right, and
because that's essentially the argument. Go ahead, Daniel.
I was just going to say regarding the Turing test, yeah, Data doesn't pass that even from the initial get-go. Like, there's no question that he is an android, and he responds as such. He can't even do contractions, which seems odd to me. That if he's so advanced, it shouldn't be that much, that much more difficult to be able to do contractions. But the Turing test, I think that's like an artificial intelligence kind of measure, or whether like something has achieved a certain level.
But not necessary for property rights to come into play, and that's the other topic.
Right, and if we're going to go down this path just for a little bit longer before we get into the legality of all this, I think that this exposes the Turing test a little bit, because Data clearly is an artificial intelligence, yet he would fail a Turing test.
Right.
He would, but I don't know if the Turing test is the end-all be-all for sentience, though, right? I don't think that's what it's trying to establish. It's just trying to establish how good we are at creating artificial intelligences to mimic human beings, to mimic human consciousness and thought processes and rationality and that sort of thing.
Right. So he would have failed that test, but he would have far advanced it in other ways. So really, it's just like one metric.
Right. And that's a main criticism of the Turing test itself, is that the Turing test does not directly test whether the computer behaves intelligently. It only compares it to human behavior.
Which is semi-intelligent at best, let's be honest.
Right. I mean, socialism is really popular, so...
Yeah, I mean, AOC got elected. Come on, people.
I mean, I was going to say, massive props to you, Daniel, for pointing out the biggest major flaw in the Turing test organically and not referring to Wikipedia.
That means I passed some test.
Right.
And speaking of AOC, Tom Woods just came out with his new book, AOC is Wrong. And you go to AOCiswrong.com, and I'll post a link on our show notes page, and you can check that out for all your socialist leaning buddies who think she's got some great ideas. You can
now. Did he just copy paste his Bernie is Wrong book and just do a search replace feature? He's like Bernie and replace it with AOC. He probably could for 90% of it.
What he's done, I believe, is taking transcripts of his episodes where he's discussed topics that are relevant to her rhetoric and basically just put them as chapters in a book. So it's not like a fully,
not like Meltdown where he's like sitting down and writing out chapters and.
Right. Yeah. This is just, hey, here's transcript 1, 2, 3, what, about these topics. But it's still totally relevant and still just crushes her naivete and wrongthink. Actually, that's not the right way to say it.
How dare you talk about a woman POC? Unbelievable.
She doesn't have wrongthink. Wrongthink is not acquiescing to political correctness. What she has is totally misguided and lacking in basic economic.
Hey, I'm going to white knight for her for a second. It's her truth, and it's beautiful, Dan.
Right, and my favorite thing when you do criticize her is that people come back to you and say, you just don't like her because she's a strong woman.
Yeah.
I'm like,
that's it. I'm just intimidated by her femininity.
No, she's an idiot. Yeah. But, Anyway, let's get back to the Star Trek thing. I didn't mean to go into the Turing test too much there. But what did you guys think of when Maddox gets introduced by an admiral to Picard? And the admiral's like, he kind of soft pedals. He's like, Maddox is going to have like a request for you later, but that's not important right now. I want to see the Enterprise. Like, it seems like a total setup kind of situation,
Yeah, I would imagine in Starfleet situation, you're basically in a kind of a military organization where you're following orders, and maybe he knows that Picard's not going to be happy about this situation. I don't know.
So was the admiral then displaying like some nuance in how he was going to present this difficult information to Picard by buttering him up and like sort of distracting him a little bit, sort of soft pedaling it in there? Something that Data would have failed at.
Now I see what you're going with. Yeah, he would have failed at this. I don't. It's been a while since I've watched some TNG. Maybe we can go to our expert Patrick on this, but I believe Data is much more of I'm just going to tell it like it is, very bluntly kind of a guy.
Yeah, he's a foot in the mouth, I think, pretty often. I think they make a point of that. Right, Pat?
Yeah, he's a lot like myself. Well, I don't know. I think I think that Picard is one of the best Starfleet captains in the entire fleet. So I don't know if he has, because in some episodes earlier to this, there was an admiral that came up to him and wanted him to be one of the lead professors at Starfleet Academy, and Picard turned him down. So I think it might be the fact that Picard is very well respected in the fleet, and there's an entire maneuver named after him. It's from the Stargazer event, I believe it was. So
the Picard. It sounds like a
Picard.
section.
Yeah. Which I don't know. It's kind of weird because this JAG officer has a boner for Picard, and it's kind of
boners.
Picard is like this skinny, tiny, lanky person.
I like how you said JAG officer.
The JAG officer has a boner for him,
and she's got some interesting commentary a little bit later on, and I've got a few notes on it.
You sexy man.
Innuendo in your endo.
Or coming onto him. Yet when he's forced, like his only recourse is to appeal to her for resolution to this dispute. That's a telltale sign of the monopoly on justice. That is a huge problem. And I know, Pat, this is a big wheelhouse for you, is you think there should be polycentric law. And I totally agree with you. But she twists that. She twists the fact that he came to her into this, oh, you came to me because you really like me, without, admitting it. So she turned it into this emotional thing when Picard was like, no, this is my only option available to me. Therefore, I'm coming to you. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is weird. And trying to think about how conflicts are settled inside of a singular business. Do you outsource dispute resolution, or do you only have one HR person at your office? I don't really know. I don't know what the answer is to that. But I mean, within Starfleet itself, of course, there's going to be a monopoly. It's a singular organization. I don't know if they would outsource dispute resolution, or at least they would have more than one goddamn JAG office.
Well, this is a new outpost in the neutral zone that just opened up. That's what the Admiral was talking about. And she just got assigned to this area, and she doesn't have staff. She has one naive ensign, and she actually tries to lean on that as a reason for not hearing Picard's petition against her ruling. And Picard's like, whoa, Miss by the book. You're required by your own rules to do this despite the lack of resources.
Well, then doesn't she end up hearing the appeal herself?
Yes, she does.
So what the hell?
But only after enlisting all the Star Trek main actor guys to serve as court people.
I don't understand that either. I mean, these people are not at all qualified. Not that you have to get a license or be part of the bar or anything to do this, but...
Hey, we got a janitor. He could do something.
Right. Exactly. I mean, Picard blows up starships. He'll be a great defense attorney.
That's right.
And
well,
then
it's the same Z's. Come on, Patrick. They go
by seniority.
I mean, you choose Riker as the prosecutor. All parties having a conflict of interest here. I mean, major ethical problems.
Yeah, and then she argues and makes sure, like, if I even sense that you're not doing this to the best of your ability, and she threatens him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and when he refuses to do it, because he's like, well, I don't believe what I'm going to be arguing. She's like, well, if you're not going to do this, then I'll just rule summarily against you anyway.
Right.
So in a way, like, she's being this little totalitarian.
Yeah.
I think
weird how that happens with a monopoly.
Right. Yeah. Monopoly on that. But I mean, they do kind of solve it elegantly in the episode, I think. And as I was saying earlier, I found Riker's argument very convincing. Like, he literally is a machine. They take his arm off. They turn him off with a switch. He's now going to be turned off by a man.
Which never happens to you in the past.
This is the first time. But prior to that, I really liked...
Usually it's the other way around.
Data's interaction with Picard, where he's like, Captain, I will not submit to the procedure. And Picard tries to go with this line of, well, it's important to Starfleet that they get this information and can create more beings similar to you to, think of all the possibilities, like we can do so much more, all this stuff. And Data says, well, LaForge has got these bionic eyes, right? And they're way superior to human eyes. So therefore, should every officer be required to gouge their eyes out and get these like fake eyes? That was pretty compelling. I like that.
Yeah, that is an excellent argument against the greater good argument. If greater good is so great, then why aren't we always taking that path and enforcing that at all times? When they always want to do that, it's always at the expense of the individual and against the individual will.
Right, and that's one of Rothbard's critiques of Benthamism is, well, greater good is fine up to a point, but say you're in the lesser number, then what?
Is that an equality as a revolt against nature too?
Egalitarianism?
I get egalitarianism. Before we get further, did I mention that I briefly considered entering the JAG Corps?
I think I've heard that before, yeah.
During that one. First or second year law school, I thought about it for all of like 2 or 3 days, and then I didn't. Also, JAG officers don't have to pass the bar. They can be admitted to any jurisdiction within the U.S. or its territories for any reason.
Membership has its privileges.
It does. So how much do you guys want me to talk about procedure? Because I have a whole bit I can talk about the adversarial process versus the civil law system.
You can go, but we might raise objections if it drags on.
You fuckers.
Right. Well, before you get into it, I did like Picard when he first came to what's her name, Louvois, and he's like, "Hey, I read all this crap about transfer of officers, and it's all gobbledygook, and I don't understand it." I feel the exact same way. I have an entrepreneurial effort, and I have a LLC, and have to deal with the state, and I read these regulations that they make you adhere to, and I'm like, what the fuck are they even talking about? It is nonsense. It is total nonsense, and how anyone accomplishes anything in this structure is beyond me. But I love how Picard brought it up. He's like, I can't make sense of any of this crap. That's why I came to you.
I mean, it's also
hence the reason why lawyers exist.
I was just gonna say that. So you can pay an egghead to do a few simple tasks for you and then have it done. I mean, in lawyers' offices, they literally have form templates that they either buy or that they painstakingly made themselves. And when someone wanted to come in, when I was doing LLCs, when someone wanted to come in, we would just do a Control F and replace the name and then charge $300.
Oh, only 300? They're getting off light. You could charge like 5 times that. Easy.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, my wife and I were talking just this morning because we're going to go meet with my CPA next week. And I was like, yeah, all this accounting stuff that these CPAs and accountants do, probably 95% of it is tax compliance bullshit.
Probably.
And, double entry bookkeeping is super important, and you really do need to have economic calculation to understand if you're wasting resources, misallocating, if you're making a profit or not. And so it is an important thing to know, but all of the intricacies that are required of you to run a business is insane. And I think that most workload from accountants would go away overnight if the tax code were abolished. And so I think if there is such a thing as an accountancy lobby or a CPA lobby, they probably love it that there's new regulations and new laws and new ambiguities because it scares people like me from doing my own taxes. Because I'm like,
they see the new proposals and they're like, whoa. This is written in like plain English. We got to gobbledygook this shit up.
Right. And the consequences are pretty extreme if you get it wrong, because they come to you and they're like, well, you lied to us, even though we make it contradictory and really hard to understand. And if we deem that, you owe us more money, owe us, right, in quotation.
They earned it, Daniel. Come on.
The greater good.
My roads
and my schools. Anyway, Pat, before I hijacked that, you were going to go somewhere. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. Hopefully this is relevant, you guys.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Interesting. So basically, in the Western world, there's 2 different prominent types of legal systems. One is in the British English tradition, which would be the adversarial legal system, which is where we have a plaintiff and a defendant, and they're both opposing sides, and they knock heads in order to find the truth of what the matter is, or display what the truth of the matter is to the fact finder. But
in layman terms, is that what we would call common law?
Yeah, in the common law system, as opposed to like a civil law system that's all positive legislature-made law or decreed from a king. But it's not always like that, because in England you have an adversarial system, but also in the US we have the adversarial system, but there's also tons of codes and laws and statutes made by legislature. But I'm talking specifically about the courtroom procedure itself, where Picard, and in this court-martial situation, it is adversarial, right? You have Picard on the defense, and then you have Riker who's prosecuting the case, and they're competing with each other to try and find the best resolution. While in an adversarial system, which is, from what I understand, in Germany, throughout Europe, in Italy, this was a big deal in that case. The Italy case, Amanda Knox, if you recognize that, the Italian legal system was totally different, where the judge was the inquisitor, and the judge would kind of, from what I understand, conduct the investigation. And so it's not that you have 2 competing sides, but you have like a judge-led investigation. It's really weird, and the roles are reversed. But I think there are some strengths and weaknesses to both sides. But I would think that in this system of the Star Trek Enterprise you would have an inquisitorial system as opposed to adversarial, because savage capitalism is too savage, right?
Well, what is don't you have tribunals in a military situation generally under a court martial?
Right. Yes, but you have the defense and the prosecution in that situation in the adversarial system, from what I understand.
I thought it was interesting that she even admits that the question that they're even trying to answer is beyond her scope and her realm of knowledge. She's like, this is best left to philosophers and saints.
Right.
And I mean, just goes to show you that these people making these decisions are hardly qualified to do so. Rothbard has a funny quote in one of his lectures about, I forget what it was, but it was some regulation about monetary policy. And he was like, okay. Oh yeah, it was, you're not supposed to say anything that could incite a bank run. And so he was saying, technically what I'm saying right now in this lecture is illegal, but it would be up to some judge who's neither qualified nor understands economic theory to make the arbitrary decision on whether this is illegal or not, because he doesn't understand how monetary policy works, and he's not qualified to.
Right, and that's why you have a dominance of, you see the arbitration process and the mediation process really coming about within the American legal system too. One, in part because the state system is so inefficient and at times incompetent, but a lot of times when you get to very complex areas of civil litigation, you will have the parties deciding to hire an arbitrator instead of having a judge in a state trial, because arbitrators usually specialize in a very small segment of the law. And so when you get a special arbitrator for a certain problem, it is a binding resolution that holds the compulsory power of the state behind it. But at least both parties agree beforehand. But the arbitrator can go in, knows the specific area of law very well, and maybe would be a philosopher in this situation of this episode, as opposed to just a judge, a state judge, or district court judge. They hear a lot of times, sometimes in big cities, they'll specialize in just criminal trials or some other things. But in a lot of times, the judge in the district court, a trial judge, doesn't know any more about this area of law and relies a lot on the attorneys to explain it to them in briefings and in argument before the trial. And it's strange. It really is strange.
That reminds me of how doctors, and I don't know if this is like a for sure thing, but I've heard this, that they don't know much about some of the drugs that they get. And the drug rep is there telling them, hey, here's what it does. Here's how it works. Like the drug rep knows, like they're the ones telling them how it works and what happens. And it just seems like that's often used as an attack against drug companies, because they're telling the doctors what to think or whatever. So that just reminds me of that situation. I don't really have much to say beyond that. I mean, other than who would know more about the drug than the drug rep, right? A doctor can only know so much about so many things due to specialization and lack of, scarce resources, time and effort, all those things.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, but does the doctor have an obligation, if they're the ones prescribing it to their patients, to fully understand it and they carry the burden, so to speak, if this has a negative impact on their patient, right?
Maybe in the current system, but I mean, I'm of the opinion that anyone should be able to try anything for any reason at any time. So it's on the individual user on whether they're satisfied enough to take it or not.
Right.
You want to
dive the current system, if you get like malpractice suit against you, wouldn't you?
Yeah, probably. I mean, malpractice and drug interactions are a significant killer. Higgs has that in his book Against Leviathan, and I think it's something on the tune of 500,000 people in the last 10 years. So more than die from car accidents and gun violence and all those things. And yet it's hardly talked about.
I'm a medical malpractice attorney. I'm working on several medical malpractice cases right now. We could go down a huge deep dive rabbit hole about informed consent if you want to.
I don't think we're gonna have time for that, buddy. We're already over halfway through our show here.
Sounds really interesting, though. I like those discussions.
Yeah, we could jump on that some other time.
Well, let's move into the a question I have related to the courtroom proceedings and her basically forcing Riker to defend a position he doesn't believe in. How can you decree you must defend something you don't believe in to the best of your ability? And if I think you're holding back, I'm going to rule against you. And a similar corollary to that is, in a trial, you always see this in movies and whatnot. They say, strike that from the record, and the jury will ignore the statement or ignore the whatever. But they're human beings. They recollect. Like it's going to flavor whatever goes from that point forward. You can't just Men in Black mind erase them.
Well, and aren't lawyers also supposed to give like the best job they can to a defendant, if regardless of whether or not he believes he's guilty, right? So you've got this murderer, and he's a murderer, but you're supposed to give the best possible defense anyway. So it's kind of
there's a couple
contrary to human feelings. I don't know what you call it.
Well, there's a couple things to unpack there. I guess first of all, yes, a jury is not going to be able to unhear things, and the judge can instruct them to disregard certain evidence or testimony, but juries are human and juries are imperfect. And as an attorney, that kind of works into your strategy too, is that, sometimes you can ask a question and the jury can't unhear it, even if the judge would instruct them not to. Should you do that? I don't know. But that is something you calculate into it, so it's all part of your grand strategy. On the other hand, it's an ethics violation. If you have a strong moral conviction against your client, you petition the court to recuse yourself from the case. If you know that you are unable to provide the type of representation that your client deserves, you have an obligation to petition the court to recuse yourself. Now, the court can hear your arguments and either approve it or deny it, but if you do have a huge moral quandary with it, you can certainly petition to do that.
Well, that's what happens exactly in this.
Yeah,
Roger recuses himself, and she's like, aha, too bad.
Yeah. I wonder if they have ethics rules. I'm sure they do. It's encoded. It's part of Wisconsin statutes, at least here. Most states, they have ethics rules that are legislated.
Yeah, so it seems like either Starfleet doesn't have those sort of ethics, or they're conveniently left out of this episode.
Right.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about Data and his sentience and, the Turing test we talked about earlier. But Maddox is basically saying, hey, I've got the gist of how to preserve your memory, and you won't lose any of that stuff. And Data's response is, well, you might have the memories themselves as data points, but you're not going to have the nuance or the flavor. And that reminded me of, Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting talking to, what's his name?
Matt Damon.
Matt Damon. He's like,
Matt
Damon. Guns are bad, okay, but I'm going to use them in every single one of my movies. But Robin Williams was like, well, what's it feel like, or what's it smell like in the Sistine Chapel? And that's basically Data's point here, is that you're going to lose the flavor of the moment. That could be lost, and there's an ineffable quality that you're not going to be able to replicate if you dismantle me and then rejack my mind Matrix style into my body again.
Absolutely. And Maddox admits as much, is that he may, it's an imperfect system. He's not the original creator of Data. He's just a fan of the guy who did it, and he's just trying to recreate the guy's work. But, when Data initially refuses, they're like, well, you can't refuse. And he's like, well, then I resign. And he's like, well, you can't resign because toasters can't resign. What do you guys think of that argument? You got somebody who says, I don't want to do this. And they're like, I'm sorry, I don't even recognize you as a living thing. It sure seems like as soon as he says, no, I don't want to do this, you kind of have to obey their wishes.
This ties into the whole dehumanization thing that happens so often with adversaries in war or whatever. And Maddox refers to Data as it and that and, some non-gender specific pronoun every time until the very end, right? When he's sort of convinced by Picard's final argument, which we'll get to. But Maddox is going into this thinking this is a computer, and it can't refuse anything. It is simply an item. It is a thing. It is an implement. It is, and he even says to the judge lady, if you wanted to retrofit the computer on the Enterprise, would you let it refuse you? And that's a good argument, I think.
It is, although we deal with these kind of situations a little bit more in Star Wars as well. So you got Star Trek, you got Data. Star Wars, you've got all these like R2-D2 units. There's only one R2-D2, but you got all like R2, R4, R3. You got all these different units.
BB-8.
And they kind of, you got BB-8, you got C-3PO, you got these robots basically that establish themselves as a little bit more than just robots, right? But I don't know if you'd feel as bad like blowing one up as you would maybe a Data unit. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I think the fundamental question is whether Data owns himself, whether he has property rights. And I think that beyond the question of sentience, it's a question of you have property rights and self-ownership if you are able to recognize the property rights of another and respect those property rights. And that's why I don't think that animals have property rights. That's why animals can be owned as property, because there are no animals that can respect property rights in a conscious manner.
My dog knows where she lives, and she'll defend her property against aggressors and intruders.
Will she just bite your, well, okay.
She bit my leg like 5 times though, so I don't know about that.
Right. I mean, if you tell your dog not to tear up your couch, will she listen to you because she knows that that's your couch and it's not right for her to do that?
The beatings will continue until she stops the couch.
So, and that's why I think it might get kind of close with like apes and chimpanzees and stuff, but chimps will go crazy and kill the hell out of you just for, no reason. And then there's another question as to whether or not Data has signed a contract to be a part of Starfleet. And then you get into the whole libertarian theory of contract, libertyweekly.net/88, because you can only contract for things that are inalienable property.
Well, he does apply to enter Starfleet, right? Like he says, I want to join. Mm-hmm. And Maddox was the only person on the tribunal or whatever that said, no, he's not sentient. But he was overruled and Data was then admitted. So this is a guy who has already a preconceived notion going into it, that he is not sentient, he's not worthy of having rights or whatever, he's not capable of having rights. And so Maddox should be able to do whatever he wants. And he knows that there's some sentimentality that's going on with, Picard and the crew members and all those things. So he has this trump card where he's like, all right, hey, Picard, give me Data. And he's like, no, he's a valued member of my team. I don't trust what you're doing. So no, he's like, I'm afraid I might come to this. So I have orders to transfer him over to me under my command. And it was a bit of a, what do they call it, dick measuring contest up to that point. And then he pulls out that trump card. And I think in a structure like that, a militaristic type structure, that might make sense, but I don't think that would play well in the free market, in a normal day-to-day situation.
No, you can act that way in a monopoly. In the free market, you suffer market penalties from acting like that. So do we want to get into some of the procedures and your problems with them, Patrick? Or do we want to just move on to like Picard's main argument and wrap this thing up? What do you think,
let's do Riker's argument. And this ties back to the Maddox thing a little bit, because he's like, what about my right to not be thwarted by blind ignorance?
And I don't have one.
But that is probably the argument of the left, the progressive types who think that they're the intellectual and moral superiors to conservative types or even libertarians.
Oh, for sure.
And, they're like, well, we should have healthcare and education and all these things. And those troglodytes over there opposing us just do so out of either evilness or spite or because they don't understand.
Yep.
And so we need to be able to do these things despite them for the greater good. Back to Robert.
For the greater good, the technocracy for the greater good. Absolutely.
Right. And to take this just one step further, and then I'll get Patrick's take on this. This whole line of reasoning in this episode, where he says, my right to be able to pursue my research without this ignorance, that reminded me of a Joseph Mengele or an Adolf Eichmann, where he's doing human experiments for the quote unquote greater good or the Third Reich. And that, that's devastating, I think, to his whole pursuit there.
Yeah, it's a positive right, basically, because in order to fulfill that right, you have to violate the rights of others. Just doesn't make a lot of sense. On a side note, there's a documentary on Netflix about the guy who prosecuted the Nuremberg trials. And this guy was a 29-year-old Jew from Harvard who had never tried a case before and all of a sudden found himself prosecuting the worst war criminals that the world has ever known, aside from maybe Bush or Stalin. It was really interesting, really inspirational. But then he goes on to fund the UN Criminal Court, which is
like the Federation, basically.
Basically, yeah. I don't think that we should go into the court procedure, though, because that's another hour and a half, and it might get dry for you guys. It'd be cool if we could do an episode where do you
have like your big objections, like the most egregious thing that would never happen that was used as to help facilitate the plot or something like that? There's like outrageous.
Any contrivances?
I mean, aside from the gigantic ethical issues about
forcing Riker to represent him,
right? Yeah. That and having people with conflicts of interest representing other people in the court. I mean, the personal relationship between the judge and Picard should have completely gotten in the way of this. At one point, you're over. Wasn't she the prosecutor? Yeah, she prosecuted his court-martial, didn't she?
Yeah, and he was clear about it.
Now she's going to be a neutral, arbitrator in the trial where he is one of the counsel.
Right. It says to her, hey, here's your chance to make law, make it a good one.
Yeah.
Are laws made from the bench?
I think laws are found from the bench. It's a pretty important distinction. You get into the Federalist Society, judicial conservatism would say that a judge's role is to say what the law is and not what they think it should be. So I'll let you chew on that. But other than that, I mean, there were lots of evidentiary issues that I'd have to rewatch it to really pick apart and do a play-by-play. And the procedure of the trial itself was just thrown off. There was a lot of what Picard would do a direct examination, or he would do a cross-examination and then break out into argument. That's unacceptable. You save your argument to the closing remarks. You don't argue with the witness on cross-examination. You don't argue your case on cross-examination. You wait till the fucking closing argument to argue. So
in your words, then My Cousin Vinny is a more accurate portrayal of a court.
It's a little bit more.
Okay.
Actually, it's a little bit more accurate. Yes.
Okay.
Now, it's possible they have this different system, right? And so they do allow this bit of back and forth, but it also makes good TV, compelling TV, because you sort of have to have the argument. You have to have the audience convinced, that, hey, Riker's got a pretty good argument here. And what's Picard going to do?
Did I mention to you before we did My Cousin Vinny that one of the Supreme Court justices cited My Cousin Vinny in an opinion?
Yeah, we posted show notes on that. Actually.
Right on. And where can they find that, Daniel?
Oh man, when did we do My Cousin Vinny? It's been a while. I'd have to go back and look up the number, but I'll post that on our show notes page here at lastnerd.com/79 for this episode. Where we're talking about Data. Is he sentient or not? Does he have property or is he property?
Oh, one last thing. Sorry about. So the one thing that was accurate about the trial and that Picard did very well is that he focused on what we call a prima facie case. And prima facie is basically establishing your case according to a given set of elements. You demonstrate to the jury that if A and B and C are met, then I win. But basically what Picard did is said, okay, they've met element A and they've met element B, but element C does not exist. Therefore, I win and Data gets his way. So I thought that was accurate.
Yeah, I actually thought that was really cool because it reminded me of how Robert P. Murphy argues climate change. He basically takes their argument as a given and their data and says, okay, even if I accept every premise that you offer, you're still wrong.
That's awesome. It's a good way to argue too.
Yeah. So what are those three things because Picard asks Maddox, what do we got to do to prove that Data essentially has property rights, to put it in libertarian terms?
Yeah, he says, well, no, go ahead. I thought you were asking.
I was also asking rhetorically. Intelligence, self-awareness, and consciousness. Intelligence is clear. He talks about his computational cycles per second or whatever it is. Self-awareness, yeah, he knows what he is and who he is. They ask him, what are you? But then consciousness is this nebulous thing that Picard points out. It's like, well, prove that I'm conscious. How do you do that? It's a good question.
Yeah, he's like, I'm waiting.
It was pretty convincing. It was pretty damn convincing.
Yeah, and then, the other thing that he shows with Data is that he has sentimentality, right? He brings up these artifacts, or he has his accolades read, right? In the very early part, and Riker's like, oh, we accept all this into the record, and Picard's like, no, play it. I want to hear all these accolades. And then later, when they're reading off Maddox's accolades, Picard's like, yeah, move on, to like show that sharp contrast between the two, to bring them closer together to a shared moment. Another good Will Hunting reference.
Well done, Daniel.
Thank you. It's like I'm here all night. But where was I going with that? Oh, sex robot. He brings Tasha. I forget what her last name was, but she's apparently only in the first season and a half of Star Trek: The Next Generation. And for some reason, I remember her from watching this when I was younger, and I thought that she was more involved in the show. But apparently, she was intimate with Data, and that just isn't.
Well, she got killed off in a later episode, like when one of the first seasons, at the end of season 1, I think. Was that true, Patrick?
Are you talking about
the blonde lady,
the ship security officer who was?
Yeah, the blonde. Yeah,
yeah, she dies at the end of season 1, I think.
Right, and that's after being intimate with Data.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, they get it on, don't they? Aren't they like an item?
I don't remember.
You just watched all these episodes.
Yeah, I mean, they were on. I mean, in between, I was feeding the baby and changing its diaper.
Oh, the dad excuse.
Sleeping.
Lovely.
And drinking whiskey.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So he has intelligence and self-awareness, but not consciousness.
Not consciousness.
Episodes.
To get us back on track.
So you are property, Pat. You're
We can disassemble you.
your family, your wife unit, and your child
You're
unit.
talking toaster.
Oh, man.
I look like a human, but there's nothing going on behind this facade.
Well, and another part of Picard's argument was, well, we too are machines in a way, and we're also made by humans. So he's basically knocking down the two initial arguments from Riker, that he was made by a human and switched off by a human, and that, he's a machine, he's these parts and whatnot. So I thought that in an elegant way, they scripted this very well. Like they actually had me hanging while watching this. I'm like, when Riker made his arguments, I'm like, oh, Picard's fucked. But he can't be because I know that Data survives or whatever. But it was really good. I thought that this, I'm going into final summary review, by the way. But
do it.
I found that this whole series so far, out of what I've watched again, has very deep and philosophical questions. And it finds a way to actually concisely make you confront these moral quandaries, and then it provides a solution to them. And this particular episode, I thought was amazing. I mean, I'm in the upper nines on this thing as far as like how compelled I was to continue watching this and see what happens. And it was totally a cliffhanger until the end. And they still don't like totally have the answer, but they know that they don't know the answer. And that's enough to thwart this risky procedure from happening to Data, because something unique could have been lost. And even Data says, hey, eventually, Maddox, your investigations in this area might yield results. And at that time, I'll be ready to help you. But you're not ready yet. And Picard's take on this was, well, we're taking this this decision here is going to apply to a whole new race of sentient beings at some point. Like eventually we are going to have an entire population of these. It's like the Empire making the stormtroopers, right? They're all the clones, right? So here I am mashing up like multiple universes here. And that's what led Picard to do his slavery argument after talking to Whoopi Goldberg, because she's like, oh, they're going to have value, they're property, and they're disposable beings. And will we care about their rights or their feelings or things that are done to them? And will we put them in riskier situations? And I mean, that's the ultimate decider in what happens with this, because I mean, she's not wrong. You are going to treat them as disposable, but if they are sentient and unique and have these feelings, they have individuality, they have negative rights, they have rights to not be molested or destroyed or put in undue risky situations without their consent. And just overall thought this was a beautiful episode. So I'm going to go with a 9.1 on this bad boy.
Nice. Yeah, I echo a lot of your thoughts, Daniel. This is an excellent episode. I remember the show being fantastic. Not this particular episode because I don't remember it from back in the day, but I remember just TNG being well written. I saw a honest trailers recently that reminded me of a couple episodes which are a little more shithouse, but this isn't one of them. This is one of those classic episodes of television that reminds you what good things can come from network TV. This is fantastic. The questions that it poses, and like you said, it didn't have all the answers, but it recognized that it didn't have the answers. So I think, when it comes to sentience, this episode kind of reminds me of like parents and having children and how they hold their rights, essentially their negative rights in escrow until they declare themselves to be adult and fit and autonomous. And as soon as Data, who is obviously a thinking, self-aware, capable of learning thing, declares his autonomy, you have to respect that. He claims his negative rights, his negative property rights. I think you can't treat him like just some talking toaster, some fancy Alexa device. When you do that, you are committing an aggressive act. So this is an excellent show. It's like a 8.8. I'm going to go just a little under Daniel's excellent score, but 8.8 is still fantastic, especially for like a TV show. Are you kidding me? If you're not into the TNG, we may be doing more of these. So get into it. What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, see, I wasn't even a huge Star Trek fan before we started this. I think I said that on the first episode. So I hadn't, before you guys made me, my wife had tried to make me watch this TV show, but I never got into it. And now that I had to for you bozos, I watched 3 episodes. And I think this is the episode where it really kind of started to click for me, maybe. And then so it became the show that I put on when I'm taking care of the boy. and sitting on the couch and wanting to sleep instead. But it's not the greatest episode that I've seen so far. It was very good, not of the TNG, but I'd give it a 9, solid 9. It was a really good episode.
Well, you're teasing us. What is the best one you've seen then?
I haven't decided yet. There's one with a world full of like strong women.
Oh yeah, Amazon Town.
Yeah,
Riker goes down and death by snoo snoo.
Yeah, death by snoo snoo. That's a good way of putting it. So,
sweet.
Yeah, or the other one where that blonde-headed bimbo dies. I like that. She dies. She's from. I hated her. She played in the first Pet Sematary movie, and I hated her in that. So I'm glad. I was glad.
The one who was sex robot with Data.
Sex robot with Data. I forget her name. I'm glad she's dead.
Wow.
Whoa.
I hate her.
Yeah. So a single death is a tragedy, Pat, but millions is totally fine, which was echoed earlier in this Star Trek episode where Data says he's a single entity is a novelty, but thousands is a race. Picard says that, right?
Did you just confuse me with Picard? Because I'll take that.
Well, you are balding, so.
Oh, that's a little below the belt.
It's a dig.
Mr. Luscious Locks over there.
They're quite luscious and long. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Pat, and I think that the next one we do in this monthly series, early in the month, will be very much related to this. In fact, almost a genetic lineage version of this, where Data has a child or creates a child. And then we get into questions of parental rights and whether the sentience and rights afforded the parent as established in this episode apply to the offspring, or if it is offspring. And that is the question. And also the title of the episode, The Offspring, I believe. And so we'll be doing that one probably early August. But Robert, what are we doing after this? I think that we have an incomplete on a movie that we had talked about last week that was an incomplete movie until our discussion and the extended version made it make more sense. But we still have more to say on it. And I think also the follow-up to it.
I want to do this Star Trek series once a month so that we can refer to it as, well, it's that time of the month. Time to do Star Trek. But what you said is true. It was weird. It was weird doing an episode and then not giving my final summary and review. We just kind of ended it. And it was like, but I have to give a score. It's like, no, we're gonna finish it. We're gonna finish it later. We're gonna finish Batman v Superman with Shaheen, and then we're also going to do Justice League along with it, which apparently there's not as much to talk about. I remember watching Justice League and just being dreadfully bored when I wasn't like outright outraged. Well, I guess I call it nerd raged because of the dumb things that are in it. But we'll see. Maybe with fresh eyes, Shaheen kind of raised my appreciation for Zack Snyder just a little bit higher than it normally was. So maybe I'll look at it again and maybe see a few good things, but I doubt it.
Shaheen is an OG, man. I love that guy.
He's a good dude.
He's a good dude. I was going to start singing The Offspring back when we mentioned The Offspring, but you segued really quick. So we're going to deprive the audience of that.
We'll say
come out and play.
I was going to do She's Got Baggage, and it's all the emotional kind.
Tell you what,
keep them separated.
During our Patreon bonus content, which we affectionately called Kathleen Turner Overdrive, why don't you bust out the guitar and knock that one out, huh, buddy?
Yeah, I'll have to learn it first. I'm sure it's simple.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode of The Last Nighters, episode 79, I want to say. Yeah, show notes more at lastnighters.com/79. If you like what we do here, you can hit us up at Patreon at lastnighters.com/Patreon. Also find us on the Launchpad Media, and please do give us a review on the old iTunes and or Apple Podcast, whatever they're calling it these days. You could also give us a subscribe on the old YouTube, like us on Facebook, send us all your money, the Buy Dre a Ferrari Testarossa fund, whatever you got. And that's a movie we should do at some point too, Robert, the NWA movie, Straight Outta Compton. I think we talked about
yeah. That's one of the Negotiators' top 2 movies of all time.
Oh boy, we're gonna have to do that one then. So anyway, we will be back next week with Justice League and a wrap up on Batman v Superman, because I had a bunch of stuff that we didn't even get to because Shaheen was so nerdery. He took us to Nerdery University on the background on this thing, and we didn't even get to talk about some of the issues I thought were worthy of discussion in the movie. So
yeah, so he pulled the Patrick, is what you're trying to say.
He took us down to Nerd Town with the Patrick style talking. He broke out the Lex Luthor's plan, which is actually important information because if you just watch it, it doesn't seem like he has really a plan, or it seems like a bunch of things are happening. But, Shaheen broke it down for us.
Yeah. And it was also, he went down the Patrick path, but in an interesting way.
Oh, fuck off.
And with that, I'll say goodnight from last night.
In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.